The war had dragged on for so long that even the sound of artillery no longer made people flinch. It boomed with a steady rhythm, like the breathing of a dying world. Those who were still alive no longer counted days by calendars, but by near escapes from death. Each morning they woke up was a small, fragile victory. On the edge of a small town in the eastern United States, a place that once had peaceful roads and wooden houses peeking through rows of trees, there were now only ruins and the sharp, burnt smell of scorched metal. The sky was perpetually gray, not because of clouds, but because of gun smoke and ash that had hung in the air for weeks. The ground had been torn apart by bombs and shells so thoroughly that it was impossible to tell where roads had once been, or where family gardens had once bloomed. Amid that devastation stood an old stone bridge spanning a narrow river. Its stones were cracked, covered in moss and blackened by scorch marks from explosions. Before the war, it had been a place where children sat and fished, where horse-drawn carts carrying farm goods crossed every morning. Now, it had become a line between life and death, the only route for Allied forces to advance into the town, and the final target the Japanese troops were determined to destroy before retreating. Along both riverbanks lay the burned-out hulks of tanks, tilted like giant beasts that had been hunted down. Trees stood broken and charred, stripped bare of leaves. The river water was no longer clear, it flowed thick and murky, carrying fragments of wood, twisted metal, and personal belongings drifting past, a dented helmet, a torn backpack, letters that had never been sent. War does not kill only with bullets. It kills with exhaustion. Soldiers on both sides shared the same hollow, sunken eyes, as if their souls had been left behind somewhere far away. In earlier battles, they no longer fought for ideals or victory. They fired their weapons to survive another hour, another day, hoping they would not be the next body left behind. Distant artillery echoed across the river, making the stones of the bridge tremble faintly. Each vibration was a reminder that time was running out. If the bridge collapsed, the entire town would be cut off, and another massacre would begin, one that would not distinguish between soldiers and civilians. At this point, the war was no longer a clash between armies. It was the destruction of everything that once carried human meaning: homes, memories, youth, and the hope of a normal future. The old stone bridge, silent and unmoving, bore the fate of hundreds of lives, those advancing forward, and those searching desperately for a way to retreat. The young soldier guarding the bridge was named Elias Moreau, 22 years old, like thousands of others, pushed by war into a position where his fate mattered more than his name. That afternoon, Elias's unit began withdrawing to regroup. Before leaving, a lieutenant pointed at the stone bridge and said curtly, "Hold it, at all costs." There was no explanation, no time to ask questions. Elias understood that the order was not meant for many men. One would be enough, or at least, that was what headquarters believed. His mission was clear: hold the bridge until the main force arrived. Prevent the Japanese troops from reaching it and destroying it during their retreat. The bridge was not merely a crossing, it was the artery connecting Allied forces to the town ahead. If it fell, the entire front would be stalled, and hundreds of soldiers behind him would pay with their lives. Elias accepted the mission in silence. He pulled his helmet lower, checked his ammunition, and stepped down into the darkness beneath the bridge. His shadow merged with the damp stone and the sour, metallic smell of river mud. From above, he was nothing more than a tiny speck, nearly invisible, yet that speck was the only thing standing between the bridge and annihilation. At his age, he should have been thinking about ordinary things: a steady job, a small home, or simply a warm dinner with his family. But war has no regard for youth. It only knows how to take. Elias was not a hero from the newspapers. His name had never appeared in victory reports, never been shouted during parades. He had never commanded anyone, never led an assault. He was just an ordinary infantryman, a name easily forgotten if he fell where no one had time to write it down. Before the war, Elias was the son of a baker in a small town. Every morning, he woke before dawn to help his father light the oven, knead dough, and arrange warm loaves of bread on wooden shelves. Hands once familiar with soft flour and comforting heat were now rough and cracked from cold, from the metal of a rifle, and from sleepless nights in trenches. He had never imagined he would learn to distinguish the sound of distant artillery from nearby fire, or recognize footsteps in the dark. He had never thought the smell of gunpowder could overpower the memory of freshly baked bread, the scent that once woke an entire street each morning. But war teaches lessons no one wants to learn. On paper, Elias's task was simple: hold the bridge until relief arrived. There was no backup plan, no promise that someone would come in time. Just a rifle, a few magazines, and a narrow space beneath the bridge, where every path led to death if he hesitated for even a moment. Elias understood this clearly. Holding the bridge was not about preserving stone and mortar. It was about keeping a lifeline open for those behind him, about buying time with his own safety. And though no one would call him a hero, in that moment the young soldier carried a burden no metal could ever measure. Beneath the cold shadow of the bridge, Elias stood still, listening to the steady breathing of the river below, knowing that until the main force appeared at the far end, he was the last line of defense. When night fell, Elias remained at his post. No comrades beside him, no voices to push away fear, only the constant flow of water, the wind whistling through stone crevices, and the heavy weight of waiting that stretched each minute into something unbearable. He knew he could not leave, could not falter, could not disappear. As long as he stood there, the bridge did not belong to the enemy. And so, beneath that aging stone bridge, the young soldier began the longest watch of his life, a watch whose ending had already been quietly decided by the war itself. That night, fog rolled thick across the river. Cold wind slipped through his worn jacket. Elias gripped his rifle tightly, ears straining for any sound. Inside his chest pocket, he kept an unsent letter, a few hastily written lines to his mother, saying the war was nearly over, that he would soon be home, helping her bake bread every morning. Darkness fell quickly, as if someone had poured it across the sky. The moon was dim behind heavy clouds, leaving only faint patches of light reflecting off the river's surface. Beneath the bridge, Elias stood motionless, his breathing slowing, every sense stretched tight to the point of pain. Then he heard it. Not gunfire. Not shouting. Metal softly touching stone, very faint, very distant, but enough to make his heart pound harder. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, pressing his back against the cold stone. He listened carefully, separating each sound from the steady flow of water below. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Disciplined. They did not rush. They moved like shadows. From the forest across the river, vague human shapes emerged through the fog. They crouched low, moving close to the ground, carrying heavy canvas bags. Elias did not need to see clearly to know what was inside. Explosives. Detonators. Fuses. The Japanese had returned to do one final thing: destroy the bridge. Not to win, not to take territory, but to leave behind a deadly void, one no one could cross without pain and blood. Elias swallowed hard. His throat burned, not from the cold, but from the pressure of fear held too tightly for too long. Each heartbeat thundered in his chest so loudly he feared the enemy could hear it. Sweat soaked his palms, making the wooden stock slippery. But he dared not wipe them. Any unnecessary movement could be the end. In that moment, Elias realized how terrifying the silence of war truly is. There was no dramatic music, no heroic shouts. Real war unfolds in long, agonizing quiet, where people confront the knowledge that in a few seconds, they may cease to exist. None of the men approaching were monsters. Beneath their uniforms were young people, carrying fear just like his own. But war offered no choice. It forced them toward one another, turning one life into the price for another. The river sounded louder than ever, steady and indifferent, as if it cared nothing for the lives about to vanish. Wind carried the smells of damp mud, metal, and lingering gunpowder. Each scent reminded Elias that people had already died here, and more would die before the night ended. The figures continued forward, no words spoken, no shots fired. This silence was not peace, it was the final breath before violence erupted. Elias knew this moment would decide everything. Once the first shot rang out, there would be no hesitation, no mercy. War would force everyone present to become either killers or the killed. And in that crushing silence, Elias stood beneath the bridge. knowing that no one would leave this place unchanged. The distance closed. 15 meters. 10. Elias peered through a gap in the stone. His finger rested on the trigger. Trembling, not from fear, but from understanding that the first bullet would shatter everything. After that shot, there would be no retreat. Only life or death. One enemy soldier raised a hand. The group halted. Another knelt and opened his bag, pulling out a cylindrical block of explosives. The moon flashed briefly, reflecting off its cold metal surface. That was when Elias pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the night, slicing the silence like a blade. It echoed off the stone walls, multiplied into a dry, thunderous chorus that swallowed the riverbank. The soldier collapsed, his body striking the wet stone, the explosive tumbling from his hands and rolling to the edge of the water. In an instant, the night shattered. Shouts erupted in sharp, urgent tones. Muzzle flashes flared in the darkness like hostile eyes snapping open. Gunfire roared back, overlapping, heavy and brutal like thunder exploding overhead. The confined space beneath the bridge became a trap of sound, every shot rebounding, slamming straight into the chest. Bullets struck the stone, sparks flying, chunks of rock exploded outward, slicing through air, hitting the bridge, the water, Elias himself. The smell of gunpowder thickened, burning his throat. Smoke rose and mixed with fog, blinding everything ahead into blurred, frantic shapes. Elias moved constantly. He no longer aimed to kill, only to avoid standing still. Each time he fired, he rolled aside, pressing against another slab of stone, leaving bullets to bury themselves where he had just been. In brief muzzle flashes, his figure appeared and vanished like a shadow torn apart by light and darkness. His shoulder flared with heat as a bullet grazed him, ripping fabric and flesh. Pain arrived late, then surged like fire. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripping onto cold stone. Elias clenched his teeth. There was no time to hurt, no time to fear. Each shot he fired became a unit of time, seconds bought for those advancing from behind the bridge. Seconds to push history in another direction. He fired to delay the inevitable. Smoke grew so dense that moonlight faded into pale fragments. Screams cut short, vanished. Some fell, some crawled, some advanced regardless of pain. War had turned them into moving shapes without names or ages. Under the dim moon, Elias saw the enemy continue forward, step by step. Despite bodies scattered beneath the bridge, they understood their task. If the bridge was not destroyed tonight, every sacrifice before would mean nothing. And if more lives were required, they would still advance. This was no longer a battle. It was a grinding force, where people were crushed into decisions without escape. Where life and death were determined within a few meters of cold, wet ground. Beneath the old bridge, amid smoke and flashes of fire, Elias Moreau kept moving, kept firing, knowing that as long as he stood, the bridge still stood. Elias retreated toward the stone railing, each step heavy, as if his legs no longer fully belonged to him. His magazine grew lighter with alarming speed. Each pull of the trigger left a deeper emptiness, not just in the weapon, but in his remaining choices. He glanced down, counting by feel more than sight. Not much left. Maybe a few shots. Maybe fewer. The cold railing pressed against his back. The ancient stones were worn, wet, soaked with blood. Below, the river flowed on, dark and indifferent, carrying fragments of the fight away. Wind intensified, wrapping him in smoke, metal, and damp earth. In the brief gap between bursts of gunfire, his mind betrayed the battlefield. The old bakery flashed into view, painfully clear. Warm orange fire glowed from the oven, dancing across aged brick walls. The smell of fresh bread filled the small room, comforting and gentle, so different from the burning stench in his lungs now. He heard his father's voice, slow, steady, telling him to turn the trays evenly, chuckling softly when Elias spilled flour. A world without guns, without orders, without death waiting behind every breath. A bullet whistled past, dragging him back, the memory shattered like smoke. The figures ahead were closer now, moving with purpose. They were coming to finish it. Then, amid the chaos, Elias heard a sound that froze his blood. Metal. Dry. Clean. Cold. A detonator being armed. It was faint, easy to miss on any other night. But to Elias, it was louder than everything else. It drowned out gunfire, screams, stone cracking. He knew exactly what it meant. He had been trained to recognize it. And more than that, he understood the consequence. 1. Maybe 2 explosive charges had been placed correctly. In seconds, the bridge he leaned against would cease to exist. Everything he had done, every shot, every second held, would become meaningless. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle one last time. Clarity replaced fear. No hesitation remained. Only one choice. He inhaled deeply, not to calm himself, but to remember what it felt like to be alive. Gunfire faded into distance, muffled like sound underwater. Only his heartbeat remained, heavy and slow, and the dry ticking of the detonator waiting to be triggered. He checked the magazine. Empty. Nothing left to fire. Nothing left to wait for. In that moment, Elias finally understood the mission. Holding the bridge was never about survival. Holding the bridge meant staying. Staying longer than the enemy. Staying until staying was no longer possible. He let the rifle fall. It hit the stone with a dull, useless sound. Elias placed his hand on the railing, feeling the cold seep into his skin. The bridge trembled beneath him, as if it too feared what was coming. Then Elias stepped out of cover. He charged toward the sound of the detonator, ignoring the gunfire. No strategy remained, no calculation. The world narrowed into a single tunnel with one objective ahead. A bullet struck his side, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Another tore through his thigh, nearly collapsing his leg, but he did not stop. Pain no longer registered, it was pushed aside. Distant, irrelevant. The world shook with gunfire, but Elias barely heard it. Sound distorted, fractured, as though he were sinking underwater. Muzzle flashes cut his shadow into fragments across the wet stone. Then he saw them. The explosives strapped to the bridge support, rough, cold, motionless, yet heavy with fate. The fuse was lit. A tiny spark crawled along it, hissing softly. Each inch burned was an irreversible countdown. No time remained. The bridge shuddered as bullets struck the stone pillar. Debris rained into the river. Elias felt the vibration through his bones, as if the bridge itself were dying. He lunged. With the last of his strength, Elias threw himself at the explosives, wrapping his arms around them. Cold metal cut into his skin. The stench of explosives filled his lungs. He ripped the charge free from the stone, muscles tearing under the strain. He did not think about survival. The only thought was distance, separating the explosives from the bridge. Even by a meter. An enemy soldier rushed forward, shouting something Elias could not hear. Fear twisted the man's face more than hatred. He grabbed Elias, trying to wrench the charge back. Elias reacted on instinct. He leaned his weight forward, locked his arms, and shoved. It was not elegant. It was desperation made physical. They lost balance. The stone beneath their feet was slick with water and blood. Elias's heels slipped, scraping stone with a shrill sound before vanishing. The railing loomed behind him, too close, too low, as if waiting. They toppled toward the edge. The world tilted, sky shattered into smoke and cloud. Then the dark river surged upward, filling his vision. Above, pale moonlight. Below, endless depth. Wind slammed into Elias's face as he cleared the railing. Cold air ripped into his lungs. The smell of river water engulfed him. In that free fall, time broke. No gunfire. No screams. No war. He felt everything, the weight of the explosives. His trembling arms. The burning wound in his side fading into numbness. His heartbeat slowed, calm in a way that felt unreal. One final thought drifted through him. Light as breath. At least, the bridge still stands. The small flame at the fuse reflected in his eyes like a falling star. The enemy soldier's face passed through his vision, not hatred now. Just understanding. Neither would return. Then the water rushed up. No scream. No final words. Only cold darkness opening wide. Elias clutched the explosives, then pushed, sending them and the other soldier deeper into the river. Darkness swallowed them whole. The water crushed in instantly. Sound vanished as if a door had been slammed shut. Gunfire, shouts, war, gone. Only the dense silence of the river remained. Light fractured above, then disappeared. Their bodies sank, heavy and slow, pulled into a place without names or history. Pain vanished, cold vanished, fear vanished. Only the certainty remained that the bridge above, the thing he had guarded with his life, still stood. Then the explosives detonated. Not with a roar. The water smothered the blast, deep, heavy, muted, no flame, no echo, just a dull shock, like the final heartbeat of something massive. The river bulged upward, black water rising like a wall, swallowing moonlight, distorting the bridge's reflection, then collapsing back into itself, as if nothing had happened. Ripples spread outward, slow and perfect. They brushed the bridge supports, making the stones tremble, a faint whisper of the night's end. Then silence returned. No body surfaced. No trace remained. Only the river flowed on, indifferent and eternal, carrying death and sacrifice downstream. Above it all, the bridge still stood, silent, heavy, bearing a story no one who wasn't there would ever fully tell. The bridge remained. Elias did not. Reinforcements crossed before dawn. No fanfare. No pause for mourning. Trucks rolled across the bridge, chains grinding on wet stone. Dimmed headlights cast narrow beams along the railing. Soldiers marched, exhausted but moving forward, because war allowed no stopping. No one asked why the bridge still stood. No one had time to learn what had happened. An officer paused briefly at the center, gazing into the dark river where faint ripples still lingered. He frowned, sensing something wrong, then turned away. Orders were given. The column moved on. The bridge fell silent again. By the time Allied units arrived fully, morning was breaking. Thin fog clung to the river. The bridge stood, scarred, cracked, burned, but intact. It stood there, unaware that its fate had been bought with a single life. The soldiers slowed instinctively. No cheers, no immediate advance. Silence settled, heavy and unspoken. Elias was gone. No body, no sign of a man who had fought to the last round. Only a broken rifle leaning against the railing. Magazine empty. Near the edge, a dented helmet floated by, spinning gently against the current. A soldier picked it up, staring inside as if expecting a name. There was none. Was anyone holding the bridge? Someone asked. No answer at first. Then an officer said quietly, "Yes, one man." No one asked his name. No one needed to. The river flowed on, keeping its secret. Later, engineers found signs, dried blood, severed fuse, the broken rifle. No official report followed, only a brief note in a young soldier's notebook. Bridge intact, supply route secure. The war moved on. Afterward, the bridge was repaired, life returned, children ran across it. At one end, a small plaque was placed, no ceremony, no medals, just a single line. For the soldier who stayed, so others could go on. No one knew Elias Moreau. Records were lost, no body was found, his name faded. But every morning, the old bakery lit its ovens. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the town, and people said that on such mornings, the river flowed a little gentler. And that was enough. The bridge stood. The town lived on. And the young soldier remained. In every safe step taken by others. And in the quiet warmth of every dawn.